A spy camera or a toy camera? You decide. Today, ladies and gentlemen, it is time to look at another Soviet beauty. This time it is this Kiev Vega. Ladies and gentlemen, this here Kiev Vega 16mm sub-miniature camera. Some may say it's a spy camera, but again, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I do not believe it is a spy camera. I believe it's just a novelty sub-miniature toy camera. But it's very, very cool, and it's got some very interesting quirks. So first thing I want to say about this camera is that it's an exact copy of a Japanese Minolta 16. So pretty much it seems that Soviets purchased a Minolta 16. They brought it into their engineering office and they just ripped it completely off and they made their own, which they called Kiev Vega. Now, when it comes to sub-miniature spy cameras used for espionage, then Minox from Latvia and I believe later Germany, they made a whole series of those, and they were used to photograph documents. Now, in order to achieve anything reasonable on a tiny slitter of film, you need very good lens, and you need some decent film, very high quality film. You cannot just use any old garbage film. Now, when I said that this is a copy of a Minolta, it is exact copy. The only difference is that there is a dot that signifies the camera is cocked and ready to take a picture. And on this camera, the dot is red, whereas on the Minolta, the dot is blue. Because we are the communist country and we will use red dot to signify that. In you capitalist countries, you use your blue dots. I don't think that's the case, but that's just my take on that. Now, let's go over some things on this particular camera. So you got a viewfinder and you got a lens. Now, in this particular state, the way it is now, it's closed. You cannot look through the viewfinder, you cannot see anything, and the lens is covered. On this side, you have a viewfinder window, and there's no optics in the viewfinder, it's just see-through. On this side, you have shutter speed and you have your aperture settings. Now, aperture ranges from f3.5 to f11, and the shutter speeds range from 1/30th to 1/200th of a second. And here you have your strap log. Now, over here you have looks like PC sync for your flash. Where you put the flash, I have no idea. And on this side you have a counter window, and then you have a button, and I'm getting to that right now. So in order to open the camera, you first gotta pull it out. You pull it out and it's now ready to take pictures. There's a red dot that appears in a shutter window or a lens window, and then you have your shutter release button. So if I press it, the shutter fires. Now, in order to cock the shutter and advance the film, you push this in and you pull it out, and it's ready again. If you don't see the red dot or blue dot for you capitalists, then the camera is not ready to fire. It means you need to advance it to the next frame. Now, how do I load the film? On this end of the camera, on this side of it, there's a button which you press and the camera slides out. Now it's two pieces. You have the outer case, which looks like a Zippo lighter, pretty cool. And then you have the rest of it. So you have your counter, which counts down from what I've noticed. It counts down from 20 to 0 frames, and there are letters K and letter N, which looks like an H, but it's actually Russian N, a Cyrillic. So on this side, you have your shutter release, and then you have this little jewelry sort of a box, which houses the film canister. So in order to pull the film canister out, it comes right out. Now this uses 60mm film. I'm not sure how long the film is. I know the Minox used the same type of cartridge. So I don't know if this cartridge came with the film preloaded or you actually loaded your own film. However, I know you can open this. And there's a spool. And you can put your film here and then spool it onto the next canister, cartridge. And then when you're done, you put it back in. You cannot put it the wrong way if it's only one way. You close this cool looking jewelry style cover. Very cool. I mean, just the design of it, it's pretty cool. The stamped metal, the texture on it, it's really awesome. And then here you have your counter where you set it to a letter K in this case, and it will start counting letter K. Yeah, letter H, and it will N. It will start counting down. So you put it back in until the latch latches, and you're ready to take your espionage picture. Now, the lens on this camera is an Industar 28mm Industar Type M. It is set to hyperfocal distance, meaning that anything from infinity to about 5 feet is in pretty good focus. It could be actually less than 5 feet, but I'll just go with 5 feet. You have a really cool italic stamped Vega, and then you have Kiev in Cyrillic and in standard alphabet. To change the shutter speed, you simply move the dial, and then to change the aperture, you do the same. Now, I'm not planning on loading any film. Technically, I could cut up some film or maybe try to purchase 16mm film, but that's not what I'm planning on doing. It's a really cool piece. It's a really cool camera. It's interesting how Soviets would just take any camera they felt like copying and they just make their own version. Now, I've used to know this guy who was an engineer at the place I worked for, and he said that when he was working as an engineer in Mielec aircraft factory and back in the old country, he told me stories how in Soviet Russia an engineer would go out and purchase, for example, Hasselblad, and they would bring it into their office and they would just take it apart and redesign, re-engineer all this stuff into their own for their own factories, and they would make Kiev 66. Salutes. So that was a pretty cool story, and I'm sure that's how they did it, because I know with the Leicas and the Zeiss, they would just take the whole factories and just move them to Russia after World War II. Now, I like to make some jokes sometimes, but this is really no joke. This camera came with this purse. I remember my great-grandmother used to have coin purse like that. And this purse houses 2 little pockets, and those pockets are for filters used on this camera. There's an orange filter and there's a yellow filter. So these kind of slide out. So what happens is, if you take this camera and you open it up, this lens cover slides out, and you can just reinstall orange or yellow depending on what you want. But it's cool that this purse survived, and with these filters in it. I think one of the reasons is that it's so hard to get them out because of the zippers and all this stitching here. It's really hard to get this filter out. That's why they never fell out on their own. But it's a really cool coin purse, worthy of any great-grandmother. That's really it about this camera. It's no crazy features, no crazy lenses. It's the story behind it the people say that it was used for espionage. Maybe James Bond used it, or whoever is his Soviet equivalent. Again, these were just copies of a Minolta 16 sub-miniature camera. Again, there were cameras used for espionage and spy cameras that were produced or used by Soviet government KGB and even CIA. There were Minox cameras, and I'm sure there were other ones because governments such as Soviet government and American government they could afford far more advanced stuff than just simple film camera. So, but it's a cool conversation piece, and if somebody comes by and looks at it, you can say, oh, it was used by Yuri Matrenko, this famous Russian spy who spied on American government back in the 60s. Now, this camera was made in the 60s. I believe Minolta 16 was originally produced in 1957, and this is a 1960s camera. So about 3 years later, they made their own. That's pretty much it about this, and I hope you enjoyed this overview of Kiev Vega sub-miniature 16mm Soviet camera.